Should we? Good morning, everybody. Jordan Fischetti is our very special guest today, Thursday, August 15th, 2024. For DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden, and you're watching DrydenWire Live, presented by Americans for Prosperity, Wisconsin. AFP Wisconsin works to reignite the American dream and break down government barriers that hold us back from our full potential. Find an event near you at afpwisconsin.com and join AFP to fight for more freedom for all Wisconsinites. We announced yesterday that we were going to have two people on for the show this morning, Jordan, yourself, and Jared. And then right before the show, he was traffic was backed up. He was trying to do it for his cell phone. It wasn't really working, so we'll get him on for a show maybe next week. We'll get it scheduled soon because I really want to talk to him. But thankfully, you are still available to be on. I can't wait to have this discussion with you. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, Ben. I can't wait to have this discussion either.
Oh, that's great. So I actually have, here's a little bio about you. You are an immigration policy fellow for Americans for Prosperity. You spearhead efforts to engage with grassroots activists regarding their position on secure borders, paired with streamlined and efficient legal challenges. I don't know what any of that means. These efforts have included 5 trips to the U.S.-Mexico border and speaking engagements in multiple states with retired border police or patrol chief Chris Clem. You've also published op-eds with National Review and Daily Caller, and you've been a guest on many radio shows. Before joining AFP, you were an immigration attorney for 6.5 years. Does that basically summarize it?
Perfectly.
Really? Fantastic. All right, end of the show. Done.
Crazy how that works out.
So you went to, when's the first time? So you've had 5 trips to the Mexican border, to the southwestern border, I should say. 5 trips. What was the first year that you went?
First year that AFP went was just last year. It was 2023. It was April 2023. I went on another border trip with our sister organization Libre the year before, but I don't even include that in the 5 trips because I played more of an ancillary role there. The 5 trips that we did, we went to a lot of different locations, talked to a lot of different people, property owners, business owners, border patrol, the migrants themselves. And at the end of the day, I tried to synthesize everything, explaining like what they saw and also what our vision for a better future is.
So what year was the first year you ever went?
First year I ever went was 2022.
Okay. You go down, you have expectations. You have to.
Oh, yeah.
Things you see on the news, things you hear from coworkers, etc. Was it what you expected, or was it a, wow, this is a lot worse, or, man, it's not as nearly as bad as everyone's saying on TV, or was it, no, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be?
It was in some ways better, in some ways worse. So I never thought it was going to be a war zone. I mean, some people, when they come down to our border trips, are like, why is it so quiet? Why is it so peaceful? Why are there not like people shooting other people in the street? And I'm like, well, it's not like that. And when people cross, they tend to cross in more remote areas, tends to be guided by the cartels and the smugglers. So like they generally speaking will stay out of your way. But what was worse than I expected was really, and this was the very first stop of our border trip. We see a local water plant owner. His name is Othel Brand, and he's right on the Rio Grande. And he told us that he used to do water sports. He would camp out on the Rio Grande. Now, I don't know if you've ever been there. The Rio Grande is really not all that grand. It's more of a stream. But, hey, do what you got to do, right?
Yeah.
But he was saying in the last couple of years that things have just gotten so bad that he's requiring his employees at certain hours to come armed. And even then, the cartel will cross over onto his property, again, just a few miles from a border patrol station, and tell him, get lost. We've got business to conduct. So, like, I was a little bit shocked by, like, just how brazen the cartel was.
And that was in 2022.
That was 2022, yeah. And we saw him every other time since then. So, I mean, same story in 2023 and 2024.
Okay, 2024. That was so this year. You were down there this year.
I was there in February.
What was the difference, if anything, between 2022 and 2024? It was only a few years. Was everything? Yeah, no, it's still the same. Better, worse, or is it literally just the same as it was in 2022?
So when I went there in 2024, that was earlier in the year. It was pretty similar to how it was in 2022. A couple differences, though, were that you're seeing at the border in general you're seeing increasingly more people from outside where people would normally come from. Up till about 2021, 2022, most people at the border came from Mexico or what's called the Northern Triangle countries. That would be El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. That starts changing in 2022. And by 2024, you're getting people kind of coming from all over the world. Still predominantly Latin America, but you've also got Russia, you've got Mauritania in Africa, and you got China. So this was more in 2023, but there were a lot of Chinese, which was actually very surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah,
A lot of
I'm a little
Chinese that were
surprised by
crossing
that.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the reason for that you've ascertained?
So from what I have ascertained is there's several potential reasons, right? And if you want to go from the most nefarious to the least nefarious, I mean, the most nefarious, of course, I like to start there, right?
Yeah.
Is that these are predominantly single adults, right?
Okay.
Usually single males. The government doesn't actually track the difference if it's a single male or a single female, but most single adults are males, right? And they're generally younger men, right? So the nefarious explanation is that some of them are crossing illegally because China is sending them, right? That's the nefarious explanation.
Sure.
Other explanations that we've seen, and I've also read a lot of reporting on, is that China in the last couple of years, as you may or may not know, has had COVID crackdowns. They've also instituted social credit, which makes it very difficult for some people to find jobs if they're too critical of the leadership.
What is that?
I am by no means an expert on it, but essentially it is the government keeps track of like who you are, what you say, and what you do. And if you say and do things that they don't like, you have very low social credit, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get a job.
What?
Yeah.
That's a thing?
It is a thing. And that's the thing that, I mean, some people worry about happening in America, too. And again, I can't speak too much about this. This goes a bit beyond my wheelhouse.
Sure.
But that is definitely a thing in China. The COVID crackdowns were real. I mean, they were sometimes more than a year where people couldn't leave their homes, right? So you got that, you've got the social credit, and there's also been increased persecution of religious minorities. You may have heard what's going on in Western China, where they're treating the Uyghur Muslim population there pretty bad. But you've also got a Christian population in China that's facing increased persecution. So there's numerous reasons why people might be coming here.
You had said, I asked you to send a few, I don't want to call them talking points necessarily, and we could certainly call them that, just a few things that, your observations, etc. Your first one you sent, and you sent a few, really stood out to me. And it was Biden inherited a broken system and made it worse.
He did.
The reason that stood out to me is because obviously this is a very big political topic, immigration. And I don't know if it should be. That's for other people to figure out. But it's like trying to find where the blame is to place. So it's, those, stupid Democrats or whatever. That's just how politics work. So a lot of people are using that, especially it's an election cycle. So that is a very common theme. And politicians right now, especially nationwide, are going to be using this. And even locally, we see these in races. We just had a primary, and some local assembly races are talking about immigration. It's just local assembly races in northern Wisconsin. So it's a very hot topic button. But I've never heard it said the way that you said it. Biden inherited a broken system. Can you elaborate on that?
I can. And it's broken for a couple of reasons, really. So this is not due to any one president. A lot of times as Americans, we put too much stock in who's ever in the White House, right? Whether it be Republican or Democrat. Makes sense, partisan politics, right?
Yep.
The problem is, though, we have not meaningfully updated our legal immigration system since 1990. That's the year where we expanded a little bit the number of green cards that people could access. But really, our system is based on a system of 1965.
What?
We haven't really, we haven't really changed very much since 1965. So we essentially have what's called country quotas, where you can't have more than 7% of any type of green card, whether it be employment-based or family-based. You can't have more than 7% from any particular country, which has caused what's called, some people will call it the death line. If you're in countries like India, Mexico, or even the Philippines, you're going to die before you get a green card because the backlogs are just so much. Because you only get 7%, whereas Andorra also gets 7%, but maybe 2 people want to immigrate from Andorra and 1 million people want to immigrate from Mexico or India. Another problem that we have is we don't have a lot of options for people who don't want to stay here. Something that's often left out of the conversation is that migration is not just permanent. There's also seasonal migration. So a lot of people, they either want to come and they want to farm maybe for a couple of seasons and then go home, or they want to do some other kind of work and then go home. But we don't really have easy pathways for that, or sometimes they don't exist at all. So I'm going to give an example. You got the H-2A program, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the H-2A program, oh, we got the comments coming up. That's awesome.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you,
That's awesome.
Molly. And thank
Thanks,
you, Jordan,
Molly.
because, right, this is what I love. Like, I get to learn. This is why I like having guests on that I don't know anything about the topic, because I also get to learn at the same time. Like, I don't understand this. Everything we know is what we see on news and, news.
Exactly, yeah. And I think every side's got a story to spin, right? And I try my best to not have a story to spin, but we all have our biases, right?
Of course.
And at the end of the day, but what I try to do is just present things as much as I can in a factual manner and let people assess for themselves. Like that's what we do on the border trips. We have them see Border Patrol. We have them talk to property owners. We have them talk to migrants. We want them to see all angles of something that's going on. Because again, too often we just rely on the news, and we'll rely on maybe just one particular news source. And yeah, there's always going to be some truth in what you hear. Like even in some of the most outlandish conspiracy theories I've heard, there's some truth behind it, but it's not the full truth.
Sure. So when you go down there and you see everything that you're seeing, how about a human moment here? We have like sheriffs on. We've had we do a weekly show with the Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald. We've had Burnett County Sheriff Tracy Finch, who's like one of the most respected sheriffs in the area. Sheriff Brent Walkover in Polk County, and we talk a lot about how do you unsee some things. So first responders, they go to a crash. A child is killed. You can't unsee that. But we also talk about the compartmentalization of it, where you have to kind of take your emotions out of it. When you go and you see these things, and you're involved in a lot of these things, is it hard to unsee it? Is it hard to compartmentalize? Does this affect you at some point? And what is that effect? What emotions does that elicit? Is it caring and kindness and pain? Is it anger? What emotions does that elicit?
Both. So, actually, as an immigration attorney, there was a lot more. I heard a lot more horrible stories as an attorney than I have actually as a policy fellow. Because most of my work is, again, either just like in Arlington, Virginia, or I'll go to a lot of grassroots events in the States. I don't interact too much one-on-one with migrants, right? But as an immigration attorney, I did every single day. So some of the stories that I heard, after a while, they really got to me. And like you said, it's a combination of caring, compassion, kindness, but also some anger, right? Like most of my clients are from Central America, the countries I mentioned earlier, like El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. And some of the stories that they told me were just awful. One that really sticks out to me is a woman was saying that the gang said they all wanted to take turns raping her 10-year-old daughter. And you just hear a story like that, and like I needed to take a minute after that because I'm just like like killing is one thing; it's awful enough, but then you hear something like that, and you're just.
How do you process that?
I'll tell you what's interesting is as time went on, I started to become a little bit more cold to it because I had to as a lawyer.
Like law enforcement, they just have to.
Right.
They again, going back to kind of that compartmentalization, you just have to.
Exactly. You have to, because if you don't, you're going to do a horrible job. And I tell my clients that. It's like, if you think that I'm being emotionless, I'm not. Like, I really sometimes will cry after you guys talk, but I have to hold it together because if I don't, you're going to lose your case, and you're going to end up having another sad story back home. But also anger, because you hear about what these gang members are doing, or more recently as an immigration policy fellow, you hear about what the cartels are doing. And if Jared were here, he would tell you about his recent trip to Mexico, where he visited. This is actually on the U.S. side of the border. We went to Mexico too, right outside of San Diego, about 60 miles east, near Yacumba. There's a man who had a property there, and he said that every night on his property, he's on American soil, he would hear women and children screaming, just screaming at the top of their lungs, just horrified. And he even had a young girl run up to him, covered in blood, and just like tried to. I don't really know what happened after that, but ran up to him, and he didn't know what to do about it. Because what was happening was the cartel was using a tree, and I say tree is really the desert's a shrub. They're using a shrub as a kind of a location where they would rape women and children who either disobeyed the cartel or didn't pay the bribe that they needed to pay in order to get into the country. And after they raped them, they would hang their underwear up from the shrub. So when Jared was down there, what happened was he went out to that tree, and the guy's like, all that underwear wasn't there yesterday.
Like,
yeah.
So how do you process it? I mean, you compartmentalize. You have to get cold to it. You just do.
You do have to.
When you were what did you do? So you were an immigration attorney. What does that entail? Like, what did you do? What was your average day or client?
Sure. Well, first I'll just say one way that I process that, sometimes the angry feelings that I have. Thankfully, I have a punching bag in my basement. I have found that to be extremely helpful.
Well, you have to. You got to get rid of some of that stuff, man.
Yep. It's not healthy to hold on to it because you're not helping anybody if you hold on to that anger and that rage. But as an immigration attorney, most of my clients were Central American asylum seekers. That is people fleeing from their country, seeking protection in the U.S. So my typical day would be I would meet with a couple of them. I would go over their stories, which could often be very difficult because a lot of times like they're suffering from trauma, so they don't really remember. They don't have a very high level of education often. So like the way that they tell stories is very like disjointed. Which could make it a bit difficult sometimes to piece it together, which meant that it was hard work. Like I had to speak to people in my second language. I spoke Spanish all day, and I had to talk about very traumatic things that they were not willing to open up about right away, and that they talked about in ways that were oftentimes confusing and contradictory. That was my typical day. And then I spent another part of the day just working on people's cases that I had met with earlier in the week or earlier in the month. That was the vast majority of what I did. I also did family petitions, but most of it was asylum.
So what led you from doing that to what you're doing now?
Well, in part, the stress of the job, right? A combination of the things that I heard, because I got married in 2019. So all of a sudden, the stories that people were telling me about the gang killing their wife or killing their husband just hit a lot harder. And it became harder for me to compartmentalize. Also, with the Trump administration, it seemed as if the policy was changing every week. And so it was very difficult to keep track of what was going on. Like sometimes I would tell my clients something, and then a court would have a ruling, and it'd be a completely different thing than what I just told my client. And what I told them was true when I told them, but now I tell them something. Now I tell them something completely different.
Right.
And it's hard to explain these things anyway to a non-legal crowd. So I just found the stress really building up. My health was suffering. I spoke to my doctor actually, and he told me like, "Hey, like I don't know whatever it is that's causing you so much stress, but you clearly are under a lot of stress, and you want to figure out a way to get rid of that." And to me, that was like the spark that was just made me determine I got to leave.
Yeah,
I got to leave. And another thing too was, and this directly applies to what I do now, is, and it's one of my talking points, is that we were trying to fit an elephant through a rabbit hole.
What do you mean?
So what I mean by that is that we were trying to incentivize everybody to come and apply for asylum. And this is especially true during the Biden administration. It was also true during the Obama and the Trump administration. Because remember how I mentioned the lack of legal pathways, both permanent and seasonal? Well, so people would come to the border and they would claim asylum. But asylum was created in 1980, and it was only meant for a select group of people. It's not enough to just say something really bad happened to me. I'll use that example of the woman who they threatened to rape her daughter, right? They could have done that, and she still would not have obtained asylum, which sounds crazy as somebody who doesn't do asylum law.
So there's strict rules under asylum?
Oh, yeah.
Is it like a total number of people, or you have to meet certain criteria?
Criteria. So you have to show that you were persecuted, with the fancy legal term for harmed, due to your membership in some protected class. be it your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or the catch-all, which is particular social group, which no judge has ever been able to define properly. But essentially, it's some trait that you cannot or should not be forced to change that society recognizes as a trait.
Okay, but that only applies to you, the person, not in this case
Right.
your family member, including your daughter. Am I understanding that
Right.
correctly?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So with her, they wanted money. Essentially, they found out that she had a citizen, not U.S. citizen, but like a boyfriend that lived in the States, right?
Uh-huh.
And they're like, okay, well, we want more money. He lives in the U.S. He can give you more money. And she's like, I can't afford that. So she fled to the U.S. But they didn't go after her for her race, for her religion, or for any other protected class. They went after her just for money. And that's what's called just generalized violence. It's not enough for asylum.
That's crazy. That's
I know.
crazy. That's kind of crazy. So is that, hey, that's just what it is, and it will never, ever change? And are you okay with it? Or is it, well, there's other ways. We're speaking specifically about asylum, but there are other ways that she could have gotten into the U.S. and how we work this whole process. Or is it, nope, sorry, it didn't happen to you specifically, so tough luck?
So for some people, there are other ways. But a lot of times, even those other ways are not permanent, right? Sometimes people come in like a student visa. But unless you then have an employer who's willing to do the H-1B process, which is extraordinarily time-consuming, bureaucratic, cumbersome, and not at all guaranteed, you go back home. But most of my clients couldn't even do that, right? They didn't qualify for that. I've talked to a lot of them that said, look, I wanted to come here. I wanted to work for maybe 5, 10 years and go back home. Because a lot of them would tell me, look, I don't belong in the U.S. I belong in whether it's El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala. Those are my people. I just can't live where I live right now because it's so dangerous. Like, I don't want to stay in the U.S. permanently. Like, I want to go back home. I want to keep my head down, do good, work hard, send money back, and eventually go be able and live in a part of the country that's safer. But because they didn't have that legal pathway to do it, they come illegally, and they have to then endure gangs, cartels, rogue government officials who bribe you, right, or who demand bribes. And by the time you get here, you've gone through all of that, like, you're not going to go back home.
All right, I want to talk to you more about that side of it. The other side, the Mexican side, and down there, and how this all stuff works. Hey, we have a couple questions. Molly, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. Do you know if the easier access to firearms in exchange for drugs contribute to this issue? The easier access to firearms in exchange for... I'm not 100% sure. Jordan, does that make sense to you?
So, I mean, there is a little bit of a trade along the border for drugs and firearms.
Okay.
But I don't know if that contributes to the issue. I think what contributes the most to this issue is the fact that you just have so many people who are now coming illegally, right? And that is actually enriching the cartels. So the cartels in 2022 made more money smuggling humans than they did actually trafficking drugs.
I wrote down, literally, I've circled it like 7 times as you've been talking. Why? And I've circled this because I want to kind of get to the crux of it. Molly says, thank you very much. And we have a question here from Wayne.
Thank you, Molly.
Claiming asylum. When accepted, do you get automatic citizenship?
No. No, with asylum, that's a protected status, which they technically can revoke.
Who's they?
Don't, but the government.
Okay.
Like, if they determine, like, for instance, that your country's not safe to go back to, or if, like, you've gone back to the country you claim to be scared of, they could revoke your asylum status. I've never seen that happen, but it could potentially happen. But what would happen after that is you've got a year. After a year, you can apply for permanent residency. And that's like a stepping block on the way to citizenship, where you're permanent resident. You can access most jobs in America. Not all. Some require security clearance where you need citizenship. Importantly, you can't vote. So after 5 years as a resident, then you can apply for citizenship.
Okay. I hear from a lot of...
It's a process. It's a process.
Understand. I hear from a lot of my Republican or conservative friends, they will say that if we just go back to the Trump time, the era, I think there was like 3 things that Biden had changed right away, some policies. I can't remember what they are. This was quite a while ago. That if we just go back to that, that's going to solve most of our problems. Do you agree with that? That, boy, if we just go back to what it was before, then boom, done. Is that really it?
Definitely not done. I will say that the border was definitely better under Trump than it was under Biden. Like, we've got data to back that up, right? I mean, under Trump, you had something like, depending on the year, anywhere from 400 to 800,000 crossing. I mean, for Biden, the last 2 years, we had over 2 million illegal crossings. And there's just no way to possibly say that the border is better now than it was under Trump. It's definitely better then, but it was still bad, right? And it was also bad under Obama. It was also bad under Bush. The thing I always tell people is that it's not that Trump was that much different than the other presidencies, but Biden is that much different. So the Trump border and the Obama border look pretty similar. It's the Biden border that stands out from those two borders.
And from your understanding, what was and again, you're not on the inside with the Biden stuff, but I mean,
yeah,
I'm not trying to throw blame on a president or anyone, but what was the reason for that from the best of your knowledge? You just got finished saying that whether it was even Obama, who was a Democrat, of course, very beloved president by Democrats, and Trump, which is a little polarizing, but a lot of Republicans like him apparently, was kind of similar. Biden comes in and it's different. What changed?
Well, I'll tell you what changed. And one of the things that changed started under the Trump administration. So back in 2020, COVID, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. So the Center for Disease Control enacted what's called Title 42. And that's a health authority, not an immigration authority, but a delegated power to Border Patrol to rapidly expel people that they thought might be carrying COVID. So the idea is somebody crosses the border, you're worried they might have COVID, rather than doing an immigration detention or an immigration procedure, you do a health procedure. So instead of passing an hour with them, you might be spending 10 minutes, right? So it's a lot quicker. You're a lot less likely to catch COVID. The problem is because it's a health authority and not an immigration authority, there's no weight attached to it.
And by no weight attached to it, that means what? That they can't stay here?
What it means is that so under an immigration authority, if they determine that you don't qualify for asylum under what's called a credible fear interview, you get removed. You get an expedited order of removal. And that order of removal, if you try to come back, you can be criminally prosecuted, and that could lead up to $10,000 of fines, not 10,000, but something around 10,000, or years in jail. So there's criminal weight, but there's also immigration weight. You have a very hard time becoming a legal resident in this country if you enter illegally, get deported, and then come back quickly. You have to wait 10 years, apply for permission to come back in order to make things work. Under Title 42, there is no immigration penalty and there is no criminal penalty. They simply send you back to the other side of the border. Sometimes they'll fly you back to your home country, but more often than not, it doesn't matter where you're from. You could be from Central America, South America, or Mexico. They just send you right back to the other side of the border. So what does that incentivize?
Well, this must be very frustrating when you look at this stuff and you just see, what are we doing?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I get why they did it, right? Like, COVID comes, like, you want to, but it's one of those things where it's like, and at first it seems to be working, right? Because it's early months of COVID and no one is really
no one knows what's going on, right?
Right. But like you get to the last 4 months of the Trump administration, and we're seeing between 70 to 75,000 apprehensions per month at the southern border. We were on pace for our worst year since the early 2000s. That's even before Biden takes office, right? So people realize what's going on, and they're like, I can cross multiple times. One man said he crossed 72 times in 3 weeks.
Illegally?
Oh, yeah.
Or legally?
Well, illegally. They crossed illegally, but because it's a health authority sending them back, there's no wait. There's no paper. There's no deportation order.
I see.
They could just simply come and turn right back around.
So how many, that's interesting, and I thought about that. How many of the illegal crossings, those numbers, are like redundant?
So
right?
I don't have the figures for like just a couple of months, but for 2021, fiscal year 2021, which includes 4 months of the Trump presidency, because the fiscal year is weird. It starts in October, right? So a lot of times people look at that and they're like, oh, it's entirely Biden. It's like, actually, no, it starts October 2020. So if you look at fiscal year 2021, about 26% of all apprehensions were repeat apprehensions.
I never thought about that until you just start. That's interesting. 1 in 4, essentially.
Right. And what's that doing? That's enriching the smugglers in the cartels. Right?
So why is that? So two questions about the why.
Yeah.
One, why do people want to come to America? Is it simply because their situation is so bad? And is that really because now it's a little more lax? It's a little bit easier to get into America, at least according to the numbers, it's showing that we have more people coming in. But if this was the same policy, like what's happening right now in our board policies right now, if that was 20 years ago, would we still see the same amount of people coming in that we do now if those policies were in place 20 years ago? Or is something shifted where these countries are getting worse and people have to get out of there?
So a couple things have changed, and I'll first start with like your earlier question of like what happened under the Biden administration, because if it had stayed at 70 to 75,000 per month, right? Like that wouldn't look so bad.
Yeah, right.
That would be about 900,000 a year as opposed to over 2 million. So something obviously changed when Biden stepped into office. Like I hear a lot of people on the left that'll say, well, like, oh, it was just as bad under Trump, and it's just no. Look at the stats. It wasn't. Verifiably, it was not. And I blame it on the way that Biden campaigned and what he did on day one more than anything else. Because he campaigned as the anti-Trump, right? Trump is all about building the wall, right?
Yep.
And he says on day one, I will stop wall construction.
Yep.
That's probably one of the things that your friends have told you that he stopped.
Yep.
Yep. Another thing, too, was Trump had talked, and I'm not talking now, I'm talking during his presidency and before, about deporting large numbers of people. Biden said, well, I'll do the opposite. I will have a moratorium on deportations for 100 days. Technically, just for people already in the U.S., didn't apply to new arrivals, but that's not the way that he campaigned. That's not the way that he phrased it. There was an interview he had with Univision where the host asked him, so this moratorium, is it for everybody? And Biden says, well, not for felons. So he makes it sound like it's for everybody but felons, including people that are just coming to the border.
Okay.
And then he says he's going to introduce legislation on day one to legalize essentially the entire undocumented population. And he does all of that on day one. The moratorium struck down by the courts. The bill goes absolutely nowhere. Wall construction is stopped. That's the only thing that's stuck, right? But word got out. And the word was, we have a president that's the exact opposite of Trump, right? The border is more open than it's ever been and maybe than it ever will be. Come to the border now. So we see about 70-ish thousand apprehensions a month the last couple months of the Trump presidency. Within 2 months of the Biden presidency, do you want to guess what it jumped to?
I'll say double.
More. 170,000.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's a 150% increase. No.
Yeah.
150.
Well,
almost. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was when he first got in.
That's when he first gets in. So at that point, everything he's doing is reacting, right?
Sure.
At that point, like, you've opened the floodgates. And that's when you start to see people coming in from other parts of the world as well. So like I said, usually most immigration, and this is definitely true during the Trump administration and the Obama administration, was Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries of Central America. But with Biden, you start to see increasingly more people coming from like Nicaragua, Cuba, Haiti, South America, Russia, China, and that's in large part due to the fact that people realize, well, this is the time to come in.
Help me understand how you had mentioned before about cartels, and they make a ton of money on this. I think you said something like they make more money on the trafficking of this than they did on, what was it, drugs or guns or something, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that was in 2022. I'm not sure if it's true in 2023,
but still, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So obviously they're looking at this as a business opportunity. People are coming through our country, and maybe it's people in our country as well, but as you just said, a lot of people from South America, maybe even China, they're coming through.
Oh, yeah.
How do they then, if people, let's say you are someone that's in South America, you're like, yep, I'm just going to, please forgive my ignorance here, but yeah, I don't know, get a cab, go up to somewhere, or get a car, and take it to Mexico, and then we'll just walk in, whatever. Where does the cartel come into this? How do they know you're coming? Is there like a highway of just illegals that they just sit and camp out and say, okay, here's how it works. Give us 10 grand or you can't go any further. Like, where do they come into this? How does that process work for them?
So a lot depends on really where you're starting. And I'm going to use your example of like Venezuela or South America,
Sure,
because I just think that shows the most full picture of what one could potentially endure. Mm-hmm. If you're starting from South America, unless you can get a visa to a country in Central America or Mexico, which has become increasingly hard, you're forced to go through what's called the Darien Gap. Have you heard of
I
that?
have heard of that.
Yeah. It's about 50 miles of some of the most inhospitable land. There's landslides, floods, disease, wild animals, not to mention gangs and cartels. So one of the people, we were at the border trip, one of the people was talking about how he would walk over dead bodies, like just to come here. And that was normal. There was a woman who actually embedded herself. She was a reporter, I think, for the New York Times, who actually walked part of the Darien Gap, which is kind of crazy. And she said that there was a 6-year-old girl that was just pushed away by the current, and they never saw her again. That's just absolutely insane. And that's just the first part of it, right? You go through the Darien Gap, you're in Panama. You still got a ways to go.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Right, and at that point, you've got to deal with a lot of the Central American gangs. You start having to deal with rogue government officials. There's one man, I read his account. He said that he was stopped 8 separate times in Mexico by different Mexican officials, often parts of like different agencies, that would come and demand bribes. If you couldn't pay the bribe, they took you off the bus and just left you there. And that's before you ever reach the cartels. But according to Jared, what happens is the coyotes will tell the cartels in advance who doesn't have enough money. And then what they'll do is they will hand that person over to the cartels. And the cartel makes you work off the debt. Do you want to guess how people work off the debt?
I think I know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's good.
It's not.
What about
It really
here's a so I'm thinking women, of course. What about men? How do they work off the debt that you know of?
So they could either be forced to do some kind of like manual labor,
Uh-huh.
or more often than not, traffic drugs.
Sure.
So you think about fentanyl, right?
Oy.
Most fentanyl is actually brought through ports of entry by U.S. citizens, but we don't know what we don't know. And there's been 1.8 million gotaways since Biden took office. That is people we know crossed, but we don't know anything else about them because we didn't apprehend them. So we have no idea how many of those people could be carrying drugs.
Wait, 1.8 million people that we don't know where they are?
Right.
Well, I don't see stories about that. I didn't know that. 1.8 million people that are in America that we don't know where they are.
Yeah. Ask your conservative friends. I'm sure they've heard about it.
Okay.
That's definitely something that like Republicans in Congress have been rightfully talking about now for years. I mean, it hasn't been 1.8 million for years. The problem is, though, and this is one of the things we talk about at AFP, is that there's such a lack of accountability and transparency in the government that we're getting these numbers through what's called FOIA requests. Like, essentially, people are requesting information from the government. They're not providing it to us.
And who would be providing that to us?
I
Or should
think that it should be DHS, Department of Homeland Security. They should give us an estimate, and that's all they can do. They can't give us an exact number.
Sure.
That's very difficult. But an estimate of the gotaways, and also what part of the border they crossed. What a lot of people don't realize is there's 9 sectors of the southern border, 2,000 miles long. So if all the gotaways are going through, let's say, El Centro in California, well, then it would make sense to put a lot more border patrol there. But we don't have that information. We don't know.
You had earlier talked about the elephant, trying to fit an elephant through a rabbit hole. In one of your talking points, you say by making it very difficult for people to access legal channels, be them permanent, as you discussed, permanent or seasonal, we encourage millions of people to enter illegally and apply for asylum, a form of relief that was intended for just a select few. This, in turn, creates huge backlogs, which incentivizes more people to enter illegally.
Yep, it's a vicious cycle.
Is this one of those? Because we hear all about the who's to blame or what's going on, and I really do. I really appreciate you coming on and not going making this political, like, oh, this Democrat's the worst, Republicans, they know what they're doing. I mean, you're being very factual about everything, and I really appreciate that. But what we don't usually hear is the how do we fix it?
Right.
And what's this causing? So help me understand this part. So it's incentivizing. What we're currently doing is incentivizing more people to enter illegally. So how do we fix this?
So I think it's multi-pronged, right? When we go down to Border Patrol, they always talk about personnel, infrastructure, and technology. They need more people. They need better roads. A lot of the border doesn't even have roads, which is kind of crazy. Like, there's roads near the border, but not along the border, which obviously makes it a little bit harder to get from point A to point B. Yeah. And I think another thing too that people often miss is technology. There was a report that came out a couple years ago. It talked about the technology Border Patrol was using. Some of it was out of date. Some of it was unsafe. But one story that really stuck out to me was there was a camera, right? And the camera went out of service. The part they needed to replace was obsolete. So do you think that they bought a new camera, or do you think they hired a third party to construct the obsolete part?
Sure. Right.
They did that. So that's a small thing. But another thing is walls. And I always say that walls should not be a political issue. We turned it into a political issue, unfortunately. But as Chief Clem will tell you, that's the Border Patrol chief that I do a lot of events with, and he'll be in Wisconsin with me next week.
I heard about that somewhere. I think even in northern Wisconsin.
Yeah, we're going to be in Rice Lake the first night at the Turtleback Country Club.
Golf course.
And then the next golf course. There we go. Then the next day we're going to be in Oshkosh.
Wait, hold on a second. Rice Lake next week. Do you remember when? What day?
Yeah. So Rice Lake there's a meet and greet at 5, and the event starts at 6. That's in Rice Lake. If you give me a second, I can give you the exact locations. Just give me one second.
Rice Lake, Oshkosh is a little further away from our coverage area, but Rice Lake, everybody knows where Turtleback is.
Okay,
Rice Lake, 5 o'clock.
It's there.
And can people just show up, or do they have to sign a thing? Or
people can show up, but also if they go to securebordersecureamerica.com and they scroll down to events, they can sign up through there.
Say that again.
securebordersecureamerica.com.
Securebordersecureamerica.com. Got it. Shoot, what were we just talking about? And I interrupted you. Asked about Chief Clem. Chief Clem.
Well, sort of Chief Clem. Yeah. What he'll always say is that "Wall from Sea to Shining Sea" is a campaign slogan. It doesn't actually make sense on the ground. What you need is a wall in strategic locations. So, and this is actually something that surprised me when I went down to the border. I always assumed that a wall made more sense in a rural area because I was like, well, there's less people there. You need a wall to stop people. But Border Patrol said no, because if somebody's really determined to get through the wall, they will, right? We see it all the time. We see people sawing through the wall, going over the wall on ladders, sometimes even tunneling under the wall. But that's not the point. The point of a wall is to slow somebody down. So like in a city where somebody can quickly disappear, right? And you'll never see them within 30 seconds. They can disappear. They're just in the city. Or a highway where within minutes they're heading towards the interior of the country. A wall that can slow you down 5 to 10 minutes that's also accompanied with technology like sensors, drones, cameras can alert Border Patrol, oh, there's somebody crossing. I'm going to apprehend them once they get through this wall.
Not to stop, but to slow down.
Yes. I mean, it will stop some people. Like, it would stop me. Like, I'll be like, screw it. Like, I'm not going over 30 feet. I'm not stalling through this.
No.
But yeah, I mean, it was meant to slow down the people that really want to get through. And that's not a political issue. And this is how I try to explain it to my left of center friends, is that this is not meant for what's called the give-ups. I didn't really get into the give-ups, but this goes back into the whole fitting an elephant through a rabbit hole. Because our asylum court now is so backlogged with asylum seekers, people know that if they come to the U.S., they've got like 5, 10, sometimes even 15, 20 years in the country before like a final adjudication of their case.
Sure.
So what they'll do, and Border Patrol has told us this repeatedly, is that they will literally give themselves up to Border Patrol. Like, yeah.
Really?
Yes.
That's
Which
just
is a good and a bad thing. Right. It's good that they're doing that. They're not trying to, like, escape, but it's bad because it's like, well, I give myself up. Like, I know that I've got a good life. Or a better life than I would have otherwise back in my country. Yeah. But unfortunately, sorry.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
I think, but unfortunately, when Border Patrol is dealing with all these people, like they'll come back from a day of work and see a family, like there's 8 people in the back of their truck. Or sometimes they will literally call an Uber to be taken to the station. Like they want to get caught. But while Border Patrol is dealing with these people, the 1.8 million gotaways, that's when they sneak by. And a wall is really meant for those people. It's meant to slow down those people. Most of which are probably fine people, but some of which are going to be bad people. It's 1.8 million people, law of large numbers, right? Everybody should want to slow down and apprehend the people that are trying to sneak by.
Why can't everyone just come in legally? Seriously, I know it's a stupid question. I don't understand, though. I really don't, because I'm ignorant to all of this. Why can't we just allow everybody? What would it take? If somebody wanted to come to our country, fine, come to our country. Get a visa and do your legal things, like the actual go through the steps, where a lot of people still do that. It's not all illegal immigrants. People do this all the time.
Yeah.
Is it because it costs too much money? What is it? Why don't we just have it where, fine, just do the legal process, done. I don't understand why we have illegal immigration. I mean, I do, but I kind of don't.
Yes.
Right?
Right. No, I totally. If you're not immersed in this, it doesn't make that much sense. What you see is just people that are coming here and like trying to take advantage of the system. And I'm going to be the first to tell you, right? Like I told you about the asylum case earlier. A lot of people that were coming in that had weak cases still had a fear of returning home. But now, because there's such a backlog, we know for a fact that there are some people crossing the border who know that they're not going to get to their case for several years, and they can get a better life if they come illegally.
Sure.
Like I'm not going to kid people and say that everybody crossing the border right now has a fear of returning home. Like that just isn't true. But that is the incentive, right? And the incentive is that because, like I said, our legal system is broken. I'm going to start with the H-2A program. Have you heard of the H-2A program?
Nope.
It's seasonal work. So like I mentioned before how a lot of my clients wanted to come for maybe a season or a couple of seasons and go back home. And actually, migration for most of American history has been seasonal Mexican laborers who would come for a little bit, then go back home and come back. That's changed a bit, but there's still a lot of people who want to do that. But we make it impossible. So in Wisconsin, you've got dairy farmers, right?
Yep.
So H-2A is meant for seasonal agricultural labor. Dairy farmers do not qualify, nor do meat processors.
What? Why not?
Because they're year-round. They're year-round. They don't qualify. They cannot access legal channels. So they are forced to hire people illegally. Because Americans, they repeatedly say that Americans don't want to do the job. So they hire people illegally. But even for the H-2A program, we had an H-2A farmer named Chalmers Carr from South Carolina on our last border trip. And he told us that he has had a farm now for 25 years. And he has almost entirely hired people from Mexico to come as seasonal laborers because Americans just don't want to do it. Like the few Americans that have signed up have quit within a couple of days. Like he just does not see much interest there. But in order to get people from abroad, every year he needs to file loads of paperwork, interact with 4 different agencies, pay thousands of dollars per person, follow 200 rules and regulations, pay for their housing, pay for their transportation, pay for their food. It's expensive. But Biden took a look at it and said, hey, hold on, hold my ice cream cone. I'm going to make this worse.
My understanding also, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure I am, that some of those payments from the people that employ illegal immigrants, there's a lot of payments that may be going to those cartels.
They might be, because some of those people owe the cartels money.
Right.
Yeah.
So the legal system, so from just the legal side of it, from the governmental infrastructure side of it, we need to do more, right?
We absolutely do. I mean, I'm mentioning the H-2A program because that's something that's been in the news a lot recently. And we're actually working right now on a lawsuit against a recent Biden regulation that would allow unions to enter employers' land uninvited, just trespass onto their land to talk with the workers. And they have to give the workers' contact information to the unions, whether or not the workers want it. The workers might say, I don't want to talk with the union. It doesn't matter. You have to give their information to the union. Also, there's another regulation that just came out that forces employers to pay workers the highest wage earned that season, which in English means that, let's say you've got a group of peach farmers, like with Chalmers Carr, right?
Mm-hmm.
A couple of them will drive a truck for maybe 10, 15 minutes a day, but they mainly are peach farmers. But according to this regulation, you now have to pay them the wages of a truck driver, which are about twice that of a peach farmer.
Jeepers.
But Ben, it doesn't stop there. You have to pay every single person on the contract that same wage.
Why?
That's the regulation.
It must be very frustrating for you, because you seem like the kind of guy that looks at things and says, all right, identify a problem, fix it, and repeat as necessary until it's all fixed.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that difficult. But apparently
it really
it is.
Shouldn't be. I mean, there's a couple of problems. There's special interests. I mean, unions are a special interest.
Who? What?
The United Farm Workers especially.
Okay.
They were especially behind definitely the union regulation where they can access employers' land uninitiated. The wage rate, I'm pretty sure they were behind that too. I'm not as sure. But then again, there's also people like within power, right, in Congress, who unfortunately want this to remain an issue because the longer that they can virtue signal about it, the easier it is to get elected. It's unfortunate, but it is a
I'm so
negative
glad you
incentive.
said that because I think everybody knows this, but nobody really wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? But that's just how politics work. It just is, right or wrong.
It's so true.
You don't really want to fix it, but you got to vote for us because the other guy isn't fixing it, and we could fix it. And it's
right.
Can't we just fix it?
Right.
Can't we just fix it? I don't care who gets the credit, but apparently politicians do, which, again, I don't hate the player, hate the game. I understand. I don't fault them for it. I mean, a little bit maybe. But come on. This is a huge issue, and we could actually start fixing this. But nobody really seems to want to do it. And honestly, Republicans haven't gotten anything done. They've had some opportunities, by the way, in the last few years, and they haven't gotten anything done. Not as many, because with how everything, the landscape in Congress is right now, and certainly with Biden, he's had opportunities to not get anything done. Everyone's like kicking the can.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's much easier that way, right? Like, I mean, actually doing the hard work, like, expends a lot of political capital. It really doesn't give you that much gain. Like, especially nowadays in the hyper-partisan atmosphere of Congress, even just working with the other side is sometimes frowned upon.
Yeah. What does media get wrong? What does media get wrong? When you watch the news, because you have all this information, and the smartest people I know on this topic, you watch the news and you just sometimes at home or sitting at work and you got the TV on, you watch some news and you just have to like facepalm, like, are you freaking kidding? What do they get wrong? What do they get right?
So, I mean, let's go from right of center to left of center, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, right of center gets right the fact that there's a border crisis, right? They absolutely get that right. What they get wrong is not so much that they get it wrong, that they don't bother trying to look for, to use a term that we've heard a lot recently, root causes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for using the term.
Oh my goodness.
Sometimes our language is poisoned, unfortunately, but they don't bother to look at like the legal immigration system. Like, they don't bother to look at like the immigrants sometimes as like people who respond to incentives like we do. Like, it's not just that like they're all coming here trying to commit crimes or take other people's jobs.
Just want a better life, man.
A lot want a better life, but there are bad people too, and that is the thing that they get right. They're absolutely right to be worried about the gotaways.
Yes.
Now, I've met a lot of gotaways. In my job, I met a lot of people who crossed the border were not apprehended. Right? I mean, this is obviously before Biden took office, but I mean, they were good people. A lot of them are just coming to work, sure, but of 1.8 million people, some are bound to be bad. Like, it'd be impossible if they weren't.
Impossible, right?
Right. You can't have 1.8 million good people. Like, it's just.
It's hard to get 10.
It's hard to get right, yeah. Hard to get 1.8 good people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So they get that part right, but they don't look enough, I think, into like the root causes. They don't look enough into like what could work, right? Like, what they want is like the really big, like, sweeping pronouncements. So, like, one of the things that they'll often talk about on the right center media is that, like, oh, we just reinstated Remain in Mexico. And that's probably one of the programs, too, that you heard your friends talk about. That is pretty commonly talked about. Mm-hmm. But if they actually looked at the data, they would find that in the last 8 or 9 months of the Trump administration, no more than 1% of each people crossing illegally, that's 1%, were put into Remain in Mexico. So that program was essentially dead by the time that Biden took office.
But it sounds good.
It sounds nice, right? And I do think that there is an argument to be made. Like, I've heard arguments on both sides about Remain in Mexico. The left will often make an argument that is a bit disingenuous because they'll say the first couple of months of Remain in Mexico, apprehension skyrocketed. That's true. But at that point, Remain in Mexico was just being instituted, right? They were expanding it during those months, or it hadn't been fully implemented yet. Sure. So you can't say, like, oh, because of Remain in Mexico, like, apprehensions went up. But then what the right will say is that, well, once Remain in Mexico is instituted, apprehensions drop precipitously. And they did drop, but they drop to the levels that were like common during the Obama administration. They didn't drop to some like amazing level of like 10,000 a month. 2019 was a surge year. There was 850,000 crossings that year. That was the worst year since I think 2007. So yeah, we went down from a high in May of like I think 130,000 maybe. Don't quote me on that number, but something like that, down to about like 80,000, then down to about 60,000. But again, it's roughly the Obama levels, and we also saw a very similar surge and then drop, albeit lower numbers. It was a much lower surge back in 2014 without Remain in Mexico. So it's nuanced, right? And I think if like they were to look into the nuance and say it may have helped, it absolutely may have helped for a couple of months, but in 2020 it really wasn't being used. So getting rid of it in 2021 likely didn't have that much of an effect. Or remember how I talked about perception earlier?
Mm-hmm.
I think perception so often is more important than reality. So migrants and smugglers probably heard, oh, there's no more Remain in Mexico. I can cross. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah. So that probably had an effect.
So that probably had an effect.
Yeah.
You've also said that most of our border security woes are downstream of our broken immigration system. What do you mean by that?
Well, like I was saying before, like it's just so hard to access legal channels. I talked about H-2A.
Okay.
It's also difficult for seasonal non-agricultural work. There's a lot of work like dairy farming, meat processing that just fall outside of the seasonal occupations. And if you want to come to be a permanent resident, it's very difficult. Unless you have like a spouse, right, or a U.S. citizen child, which you wouldn't have if you all live in a foreign country, right, or like a U.S. citizen parent, which again you probably don't have if you're in a foreign country.
Probably not. I mean, it's, yeah.
Yeah, like you often have to wait years, or depending on the country you're from, if you're from like Mexico or India, like you could be waiting decades before you ever come in through like let's say your sibling. But of course that presupposes you have a sibling that's a citizen. Which you may not.
Right.
And then the employment system, I'll tell you. So like there's the H-1B program, which is for like temporary work, but that's often a pathway toward an employment visa. But we only have 144,000 employment visas a year. And like I said, each country is only allowed 7%. So if you're from a country like India, or to a lesser extent Mexico, which sends a good amount of people,
yeah,
like you could be waiting your entire life.
Yeah, you can burn through that percentage fast.
Right. But then you also have to find an employer who wants to do it. Like I mentioned, this costs thousands of dollars. Like with the H-2A program, you have to interact with several different agencies. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money. And honestly, like the person still may not end up being accepted after all that. The acceptance rates, I don't have the exact number, are pretty low.
Oh, really?
So it's, yeah. And that's beyond the quota. That's just to get accepted, right? You can get it approved, but then you still have to wait for your turn, which, again, if you're in India, could be decades.
I think everybody wants, no, I can't speak for everybody. I want, and some people I know I think would agree with this, we want people to come here. We want them to come in legally. We want them to pay taxes. We want them to have a good life. But we don't want, terrorists. We don't want bad people. We don't want drugs coming through. So it seems easy. Like just
it
do
does
that.
seem easy.
So Jordan, just do that, right? Because
right.
Nobody wants to say like, "Oh, I'm sorry, you have a horrible life. You can't come here." Haha. Of course, we want to say yes, but we also want to make sure that you're here legally and you pay your taxes and contribute to our country if you live here. I mean, if we knew that was going to happen, I don't know anybody that would say, "Nope, keep me out of here." That seems to be the biggest.
I know a few people who would say that.
Well, okay. I don't actually, and maybe you shouldn't either.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that I know them well.
Okay,
but I've met them.
Yeah, but I think most people would echo that, right? Just that's fine. Just pay your taxes, and also if no drugs or terror, whatever. We have an election cycle right now. Regardless of who gets in, do you see anything changing? Or is this is not going to be, I don't see an end to this from a political standpoint, unless some people need to nut up and go, okay, we need to get like smart people in the room, right? We don't need politicians. We don't need D's and R's next to their names. We need PhDs next to their names. Is there anything going to solve this? Because we have politicians making these decisions? I'm not trying to be negative about it, but is there any hope here?
I mean, there is hope. And a lot of times we focus so much on the president, right? And at AFP, one of the things that we always say, and not just for immigration, is that as a country, we have to stop focusing on executive power and tell Congress to actually do its job. The problem is a lot of times Congress doesn't want to do its job, especially in the day of 10-second sound bites, right? They would much rather just be celebrities because, hey, I mean, that's a much better life if you can do that. Like, you don't have to actually take hard stances. You can just say things that people want to hear and you look good. But what I always tell like our activists is, I don't care so much who you vote for. I mean, I have people that I want to vote for, but I don't care who you vote for. What I care about is what you demand from them. If you keep demanding that they go down to the border, take a selfie, and then say something tough sounding and nothing else, then you're going to get that. But if you demand that they actually sit down and do the hard work and you boot out the people that don't, well, that's what we're going to get. The problem is, I mean, I've done a lot of these events. I've talked at this point to thousands of people, but that's still such a small fraction of the American public.
Yeah.
And like, that's what's tough is like, I'm not going to be able to reach everybody, and I'd have no pretensions of doing so. That's why I always tell people, like, it's not me, it's you. You're the one that has to talk to your friends. You're the one that has to talk to your family. And you have to encourage them to have conversations. Keep the ball rolling. Like, we're not going to agree on everything, and we don't have to, but we can come to consensus. We really can. It's just that we have to want to. And in Congress, as well as outside of Congress, which is, I think, why we see it in Congress, because that's just a reflection of who we are. I always say politics is downstream of culture.
Isn't that that's interesting? I never thought about it that way, and that's wow. Well, that doesn't say a whole lot about us.
No, I mean, and I don't mean to like, and I'm not bashing anybody like in particular. Really.
I get it.
I mean, a lot of people in Congress really do want to get the job done, but unfortunately, they're up against so much. They really are.
What conversation? Right now, if you, because we've already gone way past the time, which is great. I love this. We could talk for another hour. This has been absolutely brilliant. We're totally having you back on again. But
awesome.
What conversations would you encourage people to have? Like, how do you start the conversation? Like, you know what? Do they have to research stuff? If so, where? Like, how? What is that conversation that we're supposed to be having?
I mean, that's difficult because it depends on really who you're talking to.
Sure.
If you're talking to, like, let's say, like a close friend, like I have friends where, like, I know no matter what I say to them, like, we're going to be buddies in the morning, right? With those people, I'll just say really whatever's on my mind. Exactly. Brian, perfect. Do not let perfection be the enemy of good. And that's exactly what we do. They demand something that they think is perfect, and we end up with crap because it doesn't pass.
You're 100% right.
Yeah.
I love your candidness. I really do.
I'm from Jersey. Like, that's just how we are. Yeah, I live in Virginia now, and I hope to live here the rest of my life. I love Virginia. I'm actually looking at the mountains right now as we speak. But I'm a Jersey boy, and I talk like a Jersey boy. Yeah.
Jordan, we have so much that we have gotten to today, and there's so much more that we are going to have to talk about. But is there anything that you want to make sure that we talk about that we didn't get a chance to?
I would really just to sum up, like, sure. What we've got right now is a system that's not working, right? Now, it's been a little bit different in the last couple of months. Biden passed an executive order actually a couple months ago that has greatly reduced the number of people at the border. But that's another executive action. ACLU has sued him. They've sued him. But guess what? This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's politics. Usually ACLU asks for what's called the preliminary injunction, which means like within a couple of weeks, a judge determines whether or not to put a temporary halt on a particular program. Uh-huh. They didn't in this case. And my guess for why they didn't, and I am not a conspiracy theorist, but putting on my tinfoil hat, my guess is they don't want to make Biden look bad before the election. Well, Biden at the time, now Harris.
Yeah. How will we know that's going to be true?
I mean, there's no way of knowing that for sure.
But I mean, it makes sense. Matter. I don't think that's a conspiracy theory. That's just how, let's face it, that's just how some of these things work. And if you don't believe that this could be a possibility, what you just said, then you're living under a rock. I mean, and it could be both sides too, right? I mean, it's not just, it's just how some things work sometimes.
I mean, one of the things that we've made very clear during this talk is both sides are very guilty of public policy.
Right. They
Yeah.
are. I know.
And ACLU, if you're listening to this, I hope you are. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I have no problem being wrong. That's how you learn.
Jordan, it's been an
But
absolute
anyways,
pleasure. Been an absolute
I was
pleasure
thinking,
having you on.
yeah. Do you mind if I just say the one thing I want people to take away
Yeah.
is that, again, like it's a little bit better now, but that's about to break because there's court cases against it. There's pressure building up in Mexico. There's likely people that are sneaking by more of those gotaways because if you can't turn yourself in, you're going to try to sneak by. It's a Band-Aid. But what we've seen during the Biden administration, right, for the most part, is people giving themselves up because they know that they are going to be released into the country and that they're going to be able to apply for asylum. They might be here for a while. And that allows the 1.8 million gotaways, some of whom are bad, to sneak in. If we can improve our legal channels, both permanent and seasonal, we'll be able to divert by no means all of the gotaways, but a decent chunk of those gotaways into the legal channels, and will free up Border Patrol to do what it actually signed up to do, which, believe it or not, isn't processing asylum seekers. It's protecting us from threats to our national security and rule of law.
Is AFP, from your knowledge, because it's a big organization, AFP, Americans for Prosperity, and they do a lot of lobbying, right? They do. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of people like that. Is this something that they are talking to Congress about? Because Americans, we can have this conversation, but is AFP going to the Republicans, the Democrats, and people in Congress, and maybe even in state legislature like AFP, Wisconsin, et cetera, and saying, dude, like everything you're saying right now to me and to us, like echoing that stuff to them, has that been done yet? And if not, is it going to be? And are you expecting any results?
We are doing it. And I want to give a huge shout out to Dan Tilson. He's our federal affairs liaison. He came on just a year ago, and it feels like he's been here for years because the effect that he has had has been nothing short of momentous. In January, we released what's called the 4 Pillars campaign, the 4 pillars of border security and visa reform. And those pillars are to secure the border, to increase American competitiveness, clear rules for legal immigration, and to hold the government accountable.
I love all those things.
Yeah. So we have a 1-pager. We also have a big 15-page pamphlet, and he has handed out the 1-pager, the pamphlet, and also some polling that we have done on the issue, bipartisan polling, to every single member of Congress.
Where can somebody find that? By somebody, I mean me. I would like to actually read that. No kidding. I would actually like to read that.
So if you go online, if you actually just search Americans for Prosperity.
Oh, yeah, I go there. AFP Wisconsin, full transparency, they advertise with us, but I mean, we have a lot of people who advertise with us. But no, I can find it. If it's on the website, I can find it.
It's on the website. You can find the 1-pager. You can find the pamphlet. It also, they'll have pictures from, we did an event. We had a launch event on January 30th where 17 Congress people spoke.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
And this reminder for everybody, next week. Shoot, when is it?
Rice Lake. Next Tuesday, doors open at 5 for a meet and greet. The event starts at 6 in Rice Lake.
At the Rice Lake Turtleback Country Club. Yeah. Who's all going to be there? Are you going to be there?
I will be there.
I may swing down just to say hi because it's only 30 minutes.
I hope that you do. That'd be fantastic to have you there. I'm happy to do another segment while I'm there. We can coordinate that.
Love it. Who else is going to be there?
I mean, if he's not caught in traffic, Jared Sadowski.
Yeah, so just to be clear, for anyone that was watching, we were supposed to have another guest, and I think someone even at the very beginning said something about I spelled something wrong. I had to quickly change what the show was at 2 seconds before we go live, because unfortunately Jared couldn't be on this morning. We have some technical issues. He wasn't at work. He was trying to use a cell phone in his car, and that's not working. So we'll have him on later. But yeah, we were supposed to have. But thank you, Jordan, for coming on. So, Clem will be there. You're going to be there. I mean, you're reason enough for people to go.
I would hope so. But Chief Clem tends to be the main draw. The retired Border Patrol chief. That's what people want to hear.
Yeah. Oh. All right. What do you got plans coming up this weekend?
Hang out with my wife and kid.
Oh, you have a kid too? Come on, tell me a little bit real quick.
Yeah, his name is Ari. He'll be 2, September 28th.
What?
He was unfortunately born very premature. He was in the NICU for a couple of months, but he's doing great now. He's walking. He's starting to talk. He seems to be making momentous developments every day. just started walking up the stairs. Not crawling, walking up the stairs.
He just skipped the crawling. He's like, yeah, screw it.
Yeah. Now I'm done.
This crawling's taking too long.
He's jumping up the stairs. We have a trampoline there. He jumps on that, ends on the top floor. Don't call child service on me.
Jordan, thanks so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ben. I look forward to being back.
I can't wait. Special thank you to see, my exit script and everything has two people on here. Jordan Fischetti for taking the time to come on for a chat today. If you missed any part of today's show, yeah, we ran long, it was an hour and 10 minutes, but it was absolutely worth the watch. If you missed any of this, it'll stay a recording right here on our Facebook page. We'll also put it on our YouTube channel and our website at DrydenWire.com later today. Reminder, next Tuesday, I'll be back with Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald for our weekly Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fishy show. So until then, thank you for watching, and as always, have a blessed day.